And it is me, Will, and I'm joined by...
Me, Peter.
And we're also joined in the studio by our special guest, wrestling legend, Mike Musso.
How are you guys getting on?
Good. Thanks for joining us today, Mike. It's been a while.
Yes.
It's taken me a couple of weeks to get here, but I'm here now. Well, more than a couple. It was maybe before Christmas you guys first spoke to me about it. We've had that weather though; it's been so difficult to get about places a few weeks ago, and then just not to rub it in, but I was on holiday for a couple of weeks, soaking up the sun.
Show off.
I'm here now. That's the main thing.
So, how old were you when you started getting into wrestling? When you started watching it on TV?
When I started watching it, or getting
watching it,
I was about 8 years old, I think, when I first saw professional wrestling. My parents had just got Sky Television, and I believe my dad had been told get the kids to watch the American wrestling. It's good, and I think I wanted to watch something else at the time. I was always stubborn, so I wasn't too happy at first when they put it on, but I think it immediately sort of captured my interest, although I pretended that I'd rather have been watching whatever it was I was watching before they turned it on. But I couldn't help but be taken in by it, and I really sort of watched it ever since.
Because I mean, when you look at pro wrestling, you've got all these like colourful characters like
Definitely.
Hulk Hogan and like the Ultimate Warrior, his face paint and everything. Who was some of your favourites?
I started watching wrestling. It was probably about 1994, so it was just at the back end of Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, and I think Randy Savage was still kicking about on television. But I've got a lot of memories of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. I always remember the big heels at the time were Ted DiBiase's the $1 Million Corporation, and I believe Jim Cornette. It might have been just before or just after, at the same time. I can't remember. Jim Cornette had a bunch of wrestlers with him as well. There was a big feud between Bret Hart and Owen Hart, so that's kind of what I grew up on.
That was a pretty good time for wrestling. I think that was possibly one of the better times.
And Doink the Clown as well. We can't forget Doink the Clown.
Doink the Clown.
How many kids did he scare?
To be
think
fair,
of how many kids are scared of the clowns.
It seems to be a thing with kids and clowns.
Especially when he ripped his arm off one time to beat somebody's head in with it.
Oh, it was crush. You went from watching wrestling to actually being a wrestler. How did that come about?
It was I think I made my mind up. I can't remember exactly when, but by the time I was 15, I was set on becoming a professional wrestler. I had the internet at home, and I'd been starting to sort of turn up at the shows that were going on locally at the time. It was actually here in Dunfermline, a promoter by known in wrestling circles as Shaky. Used to run the Dunfermline Pavilion. I think the pavilion's still scared to take wrestling bookings because of the antics of this wrestling promoter back in.
Is that the pavilion in the Glen?
The Glen Pavilion. Yeah. They used to run shows there. It was BWF, the British Wrestling Federation. But anyway, it was Shaky that ran these shows, and because of whatever went on with Shaky, we now have to pay for that building in advance.
Oops.
If we were to want to use that building. But I was going to the shows at the pavilion when they were still happening, and I'd been speaking to the wrestlers there and saying, I wanted to get involved. I was maybe 13 or 14 at that time, and they kind of fobbed me off. Eventually, it was Drew McDonald, actually, that I'd managed to get a hold of via email, and he was scheduled to be wrestling at the Playhouse in Edinburgh for Brian Dixon's All-Star Wrestling, a big promoter that's still very much active to this day, probably the biggest promoter in the UK. So I turned up at Brian Dixon's show. Drew actually wasn't there. Looking back, Brian said he was injured, but I don't even know if he was scheduled to be there. It might have been a rib sending me along a joke sending me along to meet Drew at the show, and Drew wasn't even there. But Brian, I didn't even know he was the promoter at the time, let alone the biggest promoter of professional wrestling in the UK. I spoke to Brian, saying, "Oh yeah, they told me to come along and they'd train me." Brian, always on the lookout for a lackey, invited me and my friend Ian, some people might remember as Spike Anderson if they've seen him on shows, invited us in. They said, "Look, if you set up the ring, we'll show you a few moves." It kind of went from there. We started doing that regularly. About six or 9 months later, we started getting a shot in the ring and some matches.
What's your take on all these like wrestling schools that are popping up all over the place that don't really have the credentials?
Do you know it's different in general how you get into professional wrestling even 10 years ago when I started, 10 years ago there was no schools. There was no professional wrestling schools. There was maybe a few down in England, but there was hardly anywhere that you could actually go to learn how to become a professional wrestler. It was all, you were taught on the job, you were taught before shows, you paid your dues by setting up the ring and doing loads of stuff, to help the team out. Whereas now, there's that many wrestling schools, it's become more, I know certain promoters that make their money off the training school, more money off the training school than the actual shows, so it's almost become that training people to be professional wrestlers is now a business in itself. I like to think the school that we run, the W3L training school, we run that in Glenrothes. We do take our time to teach people how to wrestle, and if they do make it to a show, it's because they deserve it and they've learned everything. I try not to look at the training school as a business, because I think as soon as you look at the training school as a business, you end up with wrestling students almost like cattle. You're just looking at them being there as bodies, and it doesn't do any good for a show, I think, to have people that haven't been trained properly wrestling on a show, or people that don't look like professional wrestlers wrestling on a show, just so that person continues to pay money to come to training. If you kind of see what I'm saying,
yeah,
it's not good. I don't think that people can so easily go to these places and learn how to wrestle.
Yeah, because it would just become like a big conveyor belt.
Yeah,
really, just people coming in, training them, shipping them out again, and then not really focusing on them as individuals.
I think that shows the people that are going through the training schools as well. I think that shows that they really do have a passion for wrestling, and they realise that they've got to work hard to get on the shows. And if they want on the shows and they work hard, they get put on the shows.
When the time came to actually promoting and booking your first show, how did that come about? I mean,
the first time I ran a wrestling show was 2003. It was just before I went off to live in Canada for a year or so. I really can't remember exactly how it came about. At the time, I'd been wrestling on quite a few British wrestling shows. I'd been doing a lot of training. I was training at the time with Jake the Snake Roberts, which was an experienced Jake's a very colourful character. And I think it was just something I wanted to do. I wanted to see if I could run my own show in my hometown, just as something to do before I left the country for a little while. And it was a learning experience. It was okay for what it was as a show. I think the people that were there enjoyed it. I certainly probably work a lot differently now than I did back in 2003 when I ran a show for the first time. That's another problem. There's maybe such a thing as too many wrestling shows now. I mean, I wrestled for somebody last year, and he had 3 people at his show. Should that show really have gone ahead?
Personally speaking, it would depend. I mean, I would happily wrestle in front of 100 people if the venue fitted 150 people.
I mean, we on our first show we drew over 100 people. It was at a community centre in Rosyth. I forget the name of it.
Is that the Sizwell?
No, the Sizwell in Glenrothes. that was later on when I came back and started running shows regularly. We used the Sizwell in Glenrothes. It's a working men's club, and we ran a few good little shows there. But my very first time promoting a wrestling show was a community centre in Rosyth. We drew just over 100 people, and it was what it was. It was a little show promoted by somebody that didn't have a clue what he was doing in terms of how to run a wrestling show. But I did that, and that was my earliest experience at promoting wrestling. And now I think I'm a fairly competent wrestling promoter as well as professional wrestler. And I like to think we put on W3L puts on good shows up and down Scotland.
As you know, we've been to quite a few W3L shows.
Yeah,
I've not been to many other shows, so I can't make a comparison. But I quite enjoy it. Some really good shows.
The thing to remember as well, just going back to your question about the first W3L show, is back then there was not lots of shows going on.
Yeah,
there was a space for professional wrestling shows in the up and down the east coast of Scotland.
Before I'd even heard of W3L, I'd been to see a wrestling show years ago as a youngster at the Kinema Ballroom in Dunfermline, but that was the old British wrestling, by likes of Mick McManus and things like that. And I mean, that was way back, as I say, when I was a youngster, the late 60s, early 70s. And that was the only time I'd ever heard of wrestling actually being in Scotland until my first W3L show, which was possibly about 2005.
Channel 1 for Queen Margaret Hospital. This is Radio West Fife.
So would you ever like to work for like one of the bigger companies, like WWE or even TNA?
Of course, you want to work for those companies. For one, I certainly wouldn't mind the money that the sort of the decent positions in those companies provide, because the wrestling business, like a lot of businesses at the moment, is in the financial climate is slightly unstable, to say the least. You've got to take what you can get. But to perform on a big stage like that's obviously a goal. I'm still only 25. I've still got a lot of time on my side. So who knows?
So if the opportunity arose, it wouldn't be a difficult decision.
No, it certainly wouldn't. But then you've got to look. You've got to look financially as well. I know some of the guys that start off in the WWE. It's not as glamorous as you would think. So you've got to, like any decision in life, you've got to look at all your options and weigh up the pros and cons. But it's certainly something that I'd like to look at doing.
Before any match, do you still get the pre-match jitters?
Yeah, any time you go out there, one, you're risking injury. It could, no matter how many matches you've had, it's still very high impact and dangerous what we do. So there's always there's always the worry of injury in the back of your mind. And as well as that, what we do is very intense from an athletic standpoint. I know. I wrestled at the reasonably locally at the Alloa Town Hall last weekend. And I had that match after having Christmas, New Year, tried to work out at the gym as much as I could. Was back to kind of normal life for a week at the gym as much as I could that week. But then on holiday for 2 weeks, kind of had a jog a few days. And then I had an ankle injury the week I got back from holiday, so I'd kind of been kept from doing any kind of cardiovascular work at all for about a month.
So what do you say to all these people, Mike, who look at wrestling as being fake?
Professional wrestling, for the billions of people that watch professional wrestling around the world and enjoy it, you don't need to explain professional wrestling to them, and it's been very successful for a long period of time. But for those people that don't enjoy or understand professional wrestling, no explanation will do. So there's absolutely no point. Wrestling is wrestling. If you don't understand it, you never will.
It is one of those questions that does come with some controversy, because everybody does have their own opinion of it. Is it fake? Is it not? Blah blah blah.
If they think it's fake, go to their local wrestling school and get body slammed in the ring. See how fake that is.
So what does 2011 hold for the W3L?
The financial climate at the moment, obviously people have got maybe a little bit less money to spend on going out and seeing wrestling shows, and that kind of reflects in all aspects of entertainment or any kind of event where people are paying for admission, which at the end of the day a wrestling show is a business. At the end of the day, people have to pay for the hall, people have to pay for advertising the show, people on the show need paid, so it's got to be sensible when you're involved in running the business side. So there are a lot of places that maybe we used to visit twice and now we only visit once a year. Maybe some places that we're giving a miss where we normally would have gone, but that's based on sort of the climate and attendances. But so maybe scale back just a little bit in terms of the frequency that we're visiting towns, but we're doing that to safeguard the quality of the shows that are there. And we've got a big show coming up in Stirling in around 2 weeks' time, February 19th. It's W3L Remedy, at the Albert Halls. We're looking at bringing in lots of big names from from elsewhere in the country. We want to try and mix things up a bit. I can't let anything slip at the moment because it is in the very early stages, but we've got a full calendar of events up online on the website w3lwrestling.com.
Your full calendar of events, is this including like your gala shows that you do?
No, we do. When I'm talking about the calendar of events on the website, it's the events that you can pay to come to see us. And there will be more dates added. I think there's like 8 or 9 dates for this year up on the calendar, all for different towns across Scotland, and there is a couple more dates going to be added to that calendar.
Do you think 2011 could be a good year for Scottish wrestling in general?
Yeah, it's all about making sure that the people that come at the shows enjoy them. Obviously being involved in the business side of wrestling, I do see the trends. I speak to, I've got contacts all over the place, and everybody I speak to is saying the same thing, which reassures me that it's not just anything we're doing. That attendances to events are down. So I'd be lying if I said, I think this year's we're gonna blow all our attendance records out the water and stuff like that, because I don't think realistically we are. All we can do is put on good shows. Hopefully the people that come to them will be entertained, and a lot of people will hopefully come to the shows.
From what I gather from the website, you have a temporary champion in Darkside.
No, Darkside is the W3L heavyweight champion. What I think you're referring to is last year Darkside, or James Scott as he now wants to be known, was actually involved in a car accident in May or June last year. He was the W3L champion at the time. As a result of the car accident, we had an interim W3L championship introduced. There was a tournament for that. Damien O'Connor ended up as the reigning interim W3L heavyweight champion, and James Scott returned from his injury as the heavyweight champion, and the heavyweight champion faced the interim champion, and James Scott ended up victorious that night and left as the undisputed W3L heavyweight champion. So we did have 2 belts for a while. It was slightly confusing. It was to make sure that we were giving people their money's worth and they got to see a championship match. But as soon as James Scott came back, we unified that interim championship with the original.
Well, speaking of injuries, I know you suffered an ankle injury just a few weeks ago. How's that feeling now?
Oh, the ankle's healed up. It's fine. There was a fair bit of tape put on it on Saturday night for me to go out and wrestle in Alloa, but my ankle will be 100% by our next show in Stirling.
So your opponent for the Stirling show, I believe it's Simply the Best, David Paris.
Yeah, me and David Paris, this has become quite the rivalry. It's turned out, I'm going to try not get too angry when I'm discussing it here, but it's we've known each other for years. We were both around the same training environment, training down at the Snake Pit with Jake the Snake Roberts. So the fact that it's become such a bitter feud, a bitter rivalry between us is quite unsettling. But it was right here in Dunfermline that we wrestled for the first time, when he challenged me for the W3L Heavyweight Championship. We've wrestled probably 10, 15, 20 times, since then, and each time's been slightly more heated than the last. I've beaten him, he's beaten me. Me versus David Paris, February 19th at the Albert Halls in Stirling. And there's only room for one of us in the W3L, and that's what it's come to. It's unsanctioned. We both signed disclaimers to say whatever happens. W3L as an organisation's not held responsible, and something's got to give, and I don't plan on it being me.
I mean, it's such a shame, for like these two people here. Like, would you have classed yourself as friends at one point?
At one point, certainly friends. I mean, you're talking 10 years of association.
And then for it to boil down and just to get as personal as what it did. If Dave Paris was here, do you have anything you'd like to say to Dave?
I don't have anything left to say to David Paris. Anything that I've got left to say to David Paris, I can do in that unsanctioned match, and it's not going to be words. It's actions are going to speak louder than words.
Radio West Fife.
Unfortunately, Mike's needing to nip off to work pretty soon, so we'd just like to thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was fun. Cheers for having me, guys.